So over the last few months, I decided to finally get really into anime. It's not that I hadn't ever watched it before. I watched Pokemon and Digimon as a kid, I saw Cowboy Bebop, and I made Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood my whole personality in 2012. I got really into Kill la Kill when it first aired, and I also watched Kaiji at the recommendation of a friend. But I wouldn't say I considered anime to be part of my main media consumption diet until I got suckered into getting a Crunchyroll subscription just so I could catch up on free rent. At that point I decided to get my money's worth and finally started going through my backlog while keeping up on seasonal shows that looked interesting to me. I've caught up on so many shows that I'd always meant to get around to watching, and I've discovered so many more things I'd never heard of before that gave me a whole new experience. But because there was about a 10-year gap of me not watching anything current, there was a show that completely passed me by that I only got around to watching recently called Izetta the Last Witch. It's an anime original 12-episode series that aired in fall 2016, and what sold me was that the titular character rides on an anti-tank rifle like a broom. Also the Yuri. Now, I know the one-season curse is an in-joke among fans of anime where two ladies seem like very close friends, but because this wasn't an adaptation, it managed to tell a complete story in the time it had, and it looks fucking incredible. The animation, voice acting, and storytelling are all top-notch. It's a story that captivated me from the jaw-dropping opener to the absolutely stellar finale, and I already want to experience it again. And as I watched more of it, I realized that it reminded me of one of the shows that got me back into anime in the first place. Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury, is one of those once-in-a-generation anime that comes along and brings in a whole new audience of people who enjoy seeing cool action, gorgeous animation, and two ladies who seem like more than just friends. It also cribs a lot of story elements from Izetta the Last Witch, and I am not the only one who noticed. I mean, just look at this.
Thank you very much!
I'm not going to do a side-by-side of every parallel, but thankfully someone already made a video showcasing most of them. But the comparison is more than skin deep, and what I aim to do with this video is examine the way that these shows parallel and diverge from each other, and what I feel are the strengths and weaknesses of each. But first I should give a brief summary for anyone who's not familiar. Spoiler warning if you haven't seen one or both of these shows. Izetta the Last Witch was produced by Ajiado Animation Works, the same studio that later adapted Descendants of a Bookworm, and a number of the production staff went on to produce The Ancient Magus Bride, another anime I liked so much that I rewatched it immediately after finishing season 2. Unlike their animation work, however, this was an anime original, which meant that they got to tell a complete story without being beholden to any other source material. The story takes place in an alternate universe version of pre-World War II Europe, where the names have been changed but the story is largely the same, except that this is a world where magic is real. We open on a princess, soon to be Archduchess, trying to shore up allies before the Germanian Empire invades her home country of Aelstadt. Our heroine's name is Fine, and while she pulls off a daring escape from the train and makes it to her meeting at the opera, she's soon captured and put on a plane to be taken away with the rest of the military secrets on board. And in the meantime, the invasion has begun. One of those secrets turns out to be your childhood friend Izetta, a witch capable of staggering feats of magical power, who splits the plane in half and rides an anti-tank rifle like a broom to rescue the princess, then fights off a squad of fighter planes before linking up with the defeated remnants of the army in the region. After getting the princess some proper medical attention, they take shelter at an abandoned mansion just as a nearby fortress comes under attack. Fine regrets that they can't do anything to help in their current state, but just when all seems lost, Izetta abandons the promise she made her grandmother not to get involved in the affairs of normal humans, and uses her magic to not only turn the tide of the battle, but utterly crush the invading force to the point where no one can quite believe what happened. After arriving back in the capital, and after a lot of hesitation, they decide to reveal Izetta to the world as the second coming of the White Witch, a legendary figure who protected the country in ages long past. What follows is a story about propaganda, military escalation, loss of innocence, and the way that war leaves nobody unscathed. What starts as a simple tale about old friends being reunited quickly turns into a gripping wartime political thriller with just the right amount of anime bullshit to ease the tension. Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury, tells a story with similar themes, but approaches it from another angle by taking place in a future where humanity has conquered space, but their morals haven't progressed at the same rate as their technology. War is now fought using advanced mechs known as mobile suits, with the most powerful and dangerous of them known as Gundams having been banned over 20 years prior to when the story officially begins. Nearly the entire first season takes place at the Ostakasia School of Technology, a school where students go to learn all there is to know about mobile suit warfare, and go on to be pilots, mechanics, or business majors. Our focal character is Suletta Mercury, who wants to learn as much as she can at the school so she can go back home and establish one of her own. That plan gets sidetracked when she foils the escape attempt of Miorine Rembrandt, daughter of the president of the company that owns the school, after making the simple mistake of thinking she was about to run out of oxygen and die in the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space. Through a series of shenanigans, she ends up in a mobile suit duel against Miorine's fiancé, and her prize for winning is that she becomes the new groom-to-be. Witch from Mercury was also an anime original produced by Studio Sunrise, and they were spending every cent of that Gundam money because holy shit, this show is gorgeous. The story is heavily inspired by William Shakespeare's The Tempest, along with older anime like Revolutionary Girl Utena. But as I already mentioned, I don't think the parallels to Izetta are an accident. To start with, let's look at our leading ladies. So to get the obvious parallels out of the way, Izetta and Suletta both have red hair and a bundle of anxieties when they're in a social setting where they don't feel like they belong, they're unwaveringly devoted to one person they admire more than anything, and their names fucking rhyme. Their combat style is largely the same, with Izetta using magic to control various inanimate objects in almost the exact same way Suletta uses her gun bits. Fine and Miorine's names also rhyme actually, and it's easy to see how one could very well have inspired the other. They're both business-minded and level-headed when they have a goal in mind, and they both sacrifice anything to keep the respective women in their life safe and happy, except Miorine is way more of a tsundere about it. Miorine is in her teen rebel phase and dislikes the fact that her father controls every aspect of her life, including who she marries. Her dream is to escape to Earth, but eventually that dream turns into building a new future with Suletta at the head of Gundam. By contrast, Fine is far more willing to accept the trappings of her station, and approaches her role as the leader of her people with an almost martyr-like devotion to putting herself on the line that's only eclipsed by Izetta throwing herself in the line of fire every chance she gets, even if Fine would prefer otherwise. Izetta and Suletta both have blood on their hands, but the difference in the structure of their stories means that this plays out in different ways. Izetta loses her innocence in the process of diving out of the plane after Fine and fighting off the fighter planes that pursue them, saying simply,
I killed the pilots, didn't I?
before fully going for broke as she rains hell down on the battlefield for the rest of the series. Suletta's first kill comes at the end of season 1, and Miorine is rightly horrified. She spends the next season trying desperately to get Suletta away from her mother's influence, but ends up playing right into Prosperous' hands anyway. Fine also wishes that Izetta would stay away from battle, but eventually has to admit that they're in a war, and her country needs all the help it can get. Both of them also have, to put it mildly, some self-confidence issues. Izetta grew up as an outcast and a drifter, feared for her magical powers, and Fine was the first person who not only wasn't afraid of her, but thought she was wonderful. Naturally, this leads to an inferiority complex the size of Saturn, with Izetta struggling to believe that she could be an inspiration to anybody, much less that she could ever be worthy of any of the praise heaped upon her for her accomplishments. She's constantly diminishing herself, at one point saying that this all feels like a dream, and it seems like she's bracing herself for the moment when she finally wakes up. Suletta's lack of confidence has a more subtle foundation in that she's naturally anxious but also loves making new friends, while still trying not to be a bother to anybody. She's very obviously written as autistic, and has some behavioral quirks that the audience is meant to find endearing, but do make her come across as weird to people who have no interest in getting to know her better. Combine this with a mother who's not above using emotional and psychological manipulation for the sake of avenging a daughter that Suletta is technically only a copy of, and you've got a recipe for a girl who never really learned how to put herself first. As for which character I prefer, I adore them both for different reasons. I love Izetta's complete lack of doubt when it comes to fighting on behalf of Fine and Aelstadt, and how she's willing to sacrifice anything, including her own well-being, to see that future through. At the same time, this dogged determination leads her to nearly destroy herself in the process of achieving someone else's goal. Right before the battle that claims the use of her legs, she tells Fine that she's finally fighting because she loves Aelstad and wants to protect it for her own sake, but she still doesn't really have a personal goal or identity outside of that, and I think that's on purpose. The show has some pretty pointed things to say about messiahs and the ethics of war in general, and as innocent as she seems, Izetta can be utterly frightening in her naivete. By contrast, Suletta came to Ostacacia with the goal of learning enough to establish her own school back on Mercury, and follows through on that once the events of the show were over. Her arc is about learning to be her own person outside her mother's influence, but the fact that she had that goal means that she already was. She just needed the events of the plot to help her realize that. Suletta is utterly devoted to Miorine just like Izetta is bound to Fine, but she does have an identity and parts of herself that don't involve Miorine at all. One of the weaknesses of Izetta the Last Witch is that I can't really say the same for her. Or maybe, like I mentioned, that's part of the point. So now, with all that preamble out of the way, let's discuss what actually happens in these shows. We're entering major spoiler territory now, so proceed with caution if you'd rather experience them for yourself. The core conceit of Izetta the Last Witch is exploring what would happen if you dropped an overpowered anime protagonist into an otherwise realistic war setting. While in the areas where her magic is effective, Izetta is quite literally unstoppable, and it's not even close. She can slaughter entire battalions and toss their vehicles around like toys, she can maneuver faster than their planes, and basically nothing can touch her. But while that's fun to see in the beginning, what makes the story interesting is the way it starts addressing how the world would react to such an upset, and starts asking questions. What happens when you need to take control of the narrative surrounding your secret weapon in a way where you exaggerate her strengths and hide her weaknesses? What happens if someone on your side who hasn't been trusted with the truth is put in a position where they might leak it to the enemy? How do you get potential allies on your side without scaring them into thinking you might turn the power of your secret weapon on them next? What happens when your enemy responds in kind? There's a childlike naivete to the way Izetta approaches her new role as the White Witch of Aelstad, flying through war zones like a superhero and bringing hope to the people. She makes Fine promise to not only save Aelstad, but to end conflict everywhere, an earnest hope that could only come true in a fairy tale. It's actually a fairly unnerving scene because it's clear that the weight of this conflict hasn't fully hit her yet. In the early episodes, the tone of the show oscillates between intense action scenes and comedic slice of life, drawing the audience into a fantasy where the war is a background concern next to these characters finding happiness together, and whether Izetta and Fine will realize that they care about each other as more than just friends. One episode is almost entirely devoted to trying on dresses, learning how to dance, and visiting a pastry shop in town where Fine gives a rousing speech to the populace. In another, the two leading ladies gaze longingly at each other while lying in bed, then they attend a ball and almost share a private dance. It really does feel like a dream. But as the show continues, this veneer of innocence is slowly peeled away as the realpolitik of the setting reminds us that, actually, war isn't a fun, inspiring thing to impress your crush with, but a brutal and horrifying affair that's not as simple as splitting everyone into good guys and bad guys. Witch from Mercury similarly insulates its protagonist from the cruel realities of the world outside the school for a large part of the story, embodied metaphorically in Suletta's seeming immunity to the Gundam's curse. The main drawback of the Gund format is a type of thermal entropy referred to as a data storm, which results from the human nervous system being unable to fully integrate with the machine. In return, Gundams offer an unparalleled degree of control that allows them to dance circles around more traditional mobile suits, but it's more than the human body can handle, and prolonged usage is almost always fatal. But Suletta is able to get around this limitation somehow, and for most of the show she pilots Ariel without the prospect of an early death hanging over her. Until, that is, she finds out that someone else is paying that price for her the whole time. The show's been slowly chipping away at this illusion for a while by this point in the narrative, with things like the death and replacement of Ella and Sarah's after he lost a duel against Suletta, the assassination attempt on Delling Brannick Plant Quetta at the end of the first season, and the assault on the school in the Battle Royale duel at the open house, in which Sophie Poulenay straight up calls Suletta out for being so naive, telling her that a Gundam is a tool meant only for destruction. After Miorine sabotages Suletta's rematch against Squall Jedrick in an effort to get her away from her mother's influence, Suletta blames herself for not being strong enough, and uses the opportunity to return to her original goal of learning as much as she can at school and crossing things off her list. And for a while, it seems like she's actually doing better than ever, even if she is a bit in denial. But when she reunites with Ariel, and the digital ghost of Ariel reveals that not only has she been taking on the burden of the data storm to spare Suletta from the Gundam's curse, but Suletta isn't needed anymore, Suletta breaks down sobbing, not realizing at the time that this is Ariel's final attempt to spare her from the horrors that are coming. And boy are they ever coming. In the following episodes, a conspiracy is unveiled that involves the Dawn of Fold terrorist group, the Space Assembly League, and Shadi Kznelli of Grassley House. Long story short, in an effort to break up the corporate monopoly of the Benneret group headed by Murine's father Delling Rembrandt, the Space Assembly League financed the Dawn of Fold and co-opted Vim Jedrick's plan to assassinate Delling, and when that failed, manipulated events to get so chaotic that the Space Assembly League would have grounds to step in and take control. But the plan falls apart when Prospero Mercury, piloting Ariel, turns a protest on Earth into a full-scale battle and destroys the stockpile of mobile suits that were part of this AstroTurf terrorist plan, completely sabotaging Murine's efforts at peace talks in the process. At the same time, Noria escapes from Grassley House where she, Nika, and Ellen had been locked in a room for weeks, and goes on a rampage, destroying most of the school and trapping multiple students under the rubble, before finally being killed herself. By the time she's done, Ostacacia is no longer safe. Nowhere is. Izetta the Last Witch doesn't let its protagonist stay untouched by war the whole time either. Towards the tail end of the series, it's revealed that the Germanian Empire cloned Sophie, the original White Witch of legend, and promised her revenge on the country that betrayed her, which she sets about accomplishing with ruthless efficiency. All the carefree superheroics that Izetta's performed all season are nothing in the face of Sophie's onslaught, and she's brutally defeated as the cruel realities of the war that she's been spared thus far all catch up to her at once. By the time Sophie is done with her, Izetta is bleeding, strung up, and paralyzed from the waist down. And 2 hours later, Ailstat falls. A month passes, and when Izetta wakes up, she can no longer use her legs. The war has finally taken its toll on her. She's finally woken from the dream. But even at her lowest moment, her only thought is the fate of Ailstat, or more accurately, its ruler. Fine and her dream of a peaceful world are the only things Izetta cares about, and she'll do anything to bring that about, even if the means of accomplishing it will kill her in the process. And it's at this point that the horrible truth behind the Visa Hexa legend is revealed. It turns out that after saving the country and acting as its guardian, even though the man she did it for had gotten married in the meantime, Sophie was betrayed and sold to the Inquisition, where she was tortured and burned at the stake, with the source of her power sealed away. The Magic Stone, an artifact that can absorb the energy of the ley lines and allows its wielder to use magic anywhere, is currently being used by the newest incarnation of the Vengeful White Witch, and Izetta is offered the other half in order to fight back. The problem is, using it will shorten her life, and possibly kill her outright if she overdoes it. Suletta is put in a similar position after Noria's rampage tears Ostacacia apart. She's similarly selfless, even interrupting Nika's apology because she's busy looking for survivors under the rubble. She works tirelessly in the following days, providing food and blankets to the survivors, before she's asked to do something that only she can: pilot a Gundam and put a stop to her mother's plan that's reaching its endgame after 2 decades in the making. Suletta doesn't harbor any illusions about the situation, and never really did. She knows that she means less to Prospero than Erique does, and she doesn't stand a chance of stopping her mother on her own. But she's still willing to try, for the sake of everyone who's put their faith in her, even if she'll have to shoulder the Gundam's curse herself in order to do it. Where the themes of these shows converge most dramatically is in their respective finales, and I am not kidding when I say that both of them have basically the same ending. Izetta's mission is to stop the launch of what's effectively a nuclear missile, either by destroying it or distracting the witch that's acting as its guidance system. Suletta, meanwhile, is tasked with stopping Quiet Zero, an enormous datastorm generating superweapon that can override any Permet-based technology, which was developed with the goal of ending all conflict. But the true reason Prospera made it was to create a world where her daughter can live, since Erique can only exist within the datastorm, and Suletta has to go up against both of them. Suletta and her friends take a multi-pronged approach to this goal, with Murine and the students of Earth House infiltrating Quiet Zero while Suletta draws all the attention. Meanwhile, the Space Assembly League is preparing to fire a giant laser at everyone to just kill them all and sweep it under the rug. By contrast, all Izetta really has to do is hold off Sophie while Fine pleads their case to the Allied nations, who are currently being threatened by Germania's nuclear demonstration. But her fight does involve throwing the Eiffel Tower at her opponent, so this show still rules. But after all the spectacle and drama, both shows arrive at the same solution to end the conflict: take away the reason everyone is fighting. Suletta merges with Ariel and all the other Gundams and clears Permet Score 8, overriding the space laser before it can fire again, while Murine dissolves the Benneret group and redistributes its assets to the underprivileged Earthians. Izetta draws up all the magic from the ley lines and fires it into space, seemingly dying in the process, but goes out with a smile on her face. And in the end, both the Gundams and the magic fade away into nothing, as if they had never been. Both shows skip forward 3 years and play an ending montage of where everyone is now, before ending on a shot of the other leading lady walking to a secret getaway to reunite with their favorite redhead, both of whom are still recovering physically, but otherwise doing alright, with the implication that they've gotten as close to a happily ever after as their stories will allow. So now that we've covered what happens in these shows, let's talk about what it all means. There's a story I once heard of a man who brought an invention before Emperor Tiberius of Rome, certain it would grant him great fame and fortune. It was a substance that was clear like glass, but didn't shatter when dropped, and was easily restored to its original shape. To our modern ears, this invention was most likely a primitive form of tempered glass, which takes on a plastic-like quality due to the nature of its creation process. Instead of rewarding the man, the emperor ordered his execution and for his invention to be destroyed. After all, if it were mass-produced, it would ruin the profits of the glassmakers. There's no way to know if the events of the story actually happened or not, but the lesson still rings true. Both Izetta the Last Witch and Mobile Suit Gundam The Witch from Mercury are about what happens when an extraordinary power that the world isn't ready for disrupts established power structures. About how, when faced with a miracle, those in power will decide to snuff out a candle of enlightenment for fear that it will burn away the foundations of their own power. That is, unless they can take advantage of this new power for themselves. Both shows feature an original sin that set the events of the plot in motion. In Witch from Mercury, the gun format was originally designed to augment the human body to survive the ravages of space, but the fear that it would be used for mobile suit development drove Delling Rembrandt and the Space Assembly League to form the Cathedra Agreement and crack down on the witches of the Vanitas Institute who were making Gundams. In Izetta, the prince's wife was the one who gave the order to sell Sophie to the Inquisition, but it wasn't her idea. It was the prince himself who betrayed her, because he feared what would become of his country if the church learned that they were harboring a witch. In death, he couldn't trust that she wouldn't lead his people to ruin. This dovetails directly into the theme of military escalation that both shows employ. After the Germanian Empire unleashes Sophie on Aelstadt, Fine comes to regret her decision to use Izetta's power to turn the tide of the war in their favor, even saying that she can't find fault with her enemy without sounding like a hypocrite. She took something sacred and beautiful and used it for destruction, even if it was in the service of a greater good, and all it did was make everything worse. And in case the metaphor wasn't clear enough, the climax of the finale literally involves a nuclear bomb. Even before the missile comes into play, the show starts critiquing the idea of deterrence pretty much from the moment Aelstadt begins using Izetta as their mascot. They go to extreme lengths to keep her weakness a secret, even killing one of their own men who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The audience's sympathy naturally lies with a country that isn't bent on world domination, but the show's more grounded approach to wartime politics means that we're reminded at every turn that there aren't good guys or bad guys in a war, and everyone who participates has blood on their hands, represented by the fact that their savior wears a Snow White dress into battle with hair stained crimson. Quiet Zero isn't quite as on the nose as a nuke metaphor, but it's still a weapon of mass destruction in the hands of a mad woman that grew out of the seemingly innocent desire to end all conflict forever. The data for the project was gathered in part by the seemingly consequence-free dueling that Suletta does in a lot of the early episodes, which served to test and strengthen Ariel's machine override abilities that Quiet Zero employs on a massive scale. Prospero sent her daughter to school just like Suletta had always dreamed, but that dream never actually mattered to her as much as her original daughter. In response to Ariel, the other companies began production of their own Gundams and fanned the flames of conflict because the military-industrial complex works only to perpetuate its own existence. But in the end, Suletta uses those same Gundams to stop the fighting, and then they begin to fade away, just like Izetta gets rid of the magic that the people of her world couldn't be trusted with using, no matter how pure their intentions. Both shows are about disarmament, in one way or another. They're about how war isn't a game, or a fairy tale, or anything to aspire to. It's all fire and blood, and it's everyone's responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen. That said, as much as I praised Izetta's handling of wartime politics, the show's writers used the altered setting to soften the war a bit. The Germanian Empire is still an empire after all, and by not directly portraying Hitler, even if Otto does share his fate, they didn't have to address the horrors of the Nazis. Confining the conflict to Europe also means that they didn't have to address what Japan was doing at the time in our world. I'm also not really a fan of how the events of the war play out more or less as they did in our world once magic is removed as a factor, and the importance of the United States is greatly exaggerated just like in our history, but it's whatever. Honestly, Witch from Mercury is way more about parenting than it is about war. It's about how each generation owes it to the next to make the world a better place, and how not doing that will perpetuate cycles of bloodshed and misery. The show isn't really interested in punishing its villains either, which the series director claimed was an intentional creative choice. In the end, it's not the responsibility of children to punish their parents. only to learn from their mistakes. In a similar way, Witch from Mercury learns from the media that inspired it, and I strongly feel that includes Izetta the Last Witch. As much as I adore that show and what it accomplished, there are a few areas where I feel Witch from Mercury improved on it as a spiritual successor. Let's start with one that might not be as obvious as the ones we've talked about so far. So you may have noticed from some of the shots I've used of Izetta the Last Witch throughout this video that the animators put a lot of effort into making these characters pleasant to look at, and go out of their way to show them in compromising poses or revealing outfits for the sake of giving the audience a little thrill. Episode 4 features most of it, and it does make sense since that episode focuses mainly on those lower stakes slice of life elements in contrast to the intense action of the previous episode. The OP features these lingering shots of Izetta's naked body that caps off with her suggestively dragging a finger from her chin down to her throat. And it is nice to look at, but I don't really think a lot of it belongs here. Now, I am not someone who's opposed to fan service. I'm a big fan of the ecchi genre, and Kill la Kill ranks among my favorite anime of all time, along with shows like High School DxD, My Dress Up Darling, and even gushing over Magical Girls. The difference is that for those shows, the fan service is kind of the point, or at the very least a big part of their appeal. One of the more common takes you'll find on fan service, especially from pretentious video essayists, is that it's fine as long as it serves the story, but I find that to be a little too broad. There's a question I like to ask myself when evaluating fan service. Is this part of what I expect from this experience? In the case of those other shows I mentioned, absolutely. If the series is horny and doesn't care if you know it, I'm on board as long as the titillation isn't all it has to offer. But with Izetta, I came to this show for the jaw-dropping action scenes and the fun character dynamics, along with how common anime tropes clash with genre conventions of a more realistic wartime political thriller. Also the Yuri. Again, the fan service is nice to look at, but it's not the reason I'm here. The show does ease off it a bit after episode 4, but where I really take issue is this scene from episode 9. Like, in the moments immediately prior to this, Izetta fell from the sky and crashed into the ground so hard she literally broke her spine and lost the use of her legs. Is this really how you should be shooting this scene? And then the following episode uses this long tracking shot that lingers on her battered body just long enough to feel a little gross. In context it makes sense, and thankfully the Germanians photographing her are only doing it to spread word of her defeat, but the creative staff chose to pose her like that when they could have easily gone with something way less sexualized. Now that's not to say the show doesn't do anything good with its fan service. An earlier episode, titled A Cruel Fairy Tale, actually makes interesting use of it, just not involving Izetta. The episode follows the point of view of Rickard, a Germanian spy who travels to Aelstad in hopes of infiltrating an ancient castle where the secret of the White Witch is thought to be hidden. Along the way, he's picked up by Bianca and Lada, a member of Fine's royal guard and Izetta's personal maid respectively, after a misadventure that involves him getting soaked. They take him to an inn, and after briefly pissing Bianca off by telling her a different version of the Visa Hexa legend, he goes to her door to apologize, hears a scream, and barges into the room, only to walk in on her taking a bath. Now, the episode has been dropping hints the whole time that these two might be experiencing some mild attraction to each other, and this kind of misunderstanding is common in certain types of anime romance subplots. It's a comparatively innocent moment, and as Rickard proceeds with his mission, he regrets that he never got the chance to apologize. Still, the episode invites you to ask, is it possible for those two to work through the misunderstanding and get closer? Maybe even fall in love? And the answer is no. Obviously, no. In the end, both of them are too loyal to their countries, and he takes a plunge off the castle wall after she shoots him through the heart. That kind of innocent romantic tension didn't stand a chance in this kind of story. The episode title did promise a cruel fairy tale, after all. So while this is a little distracting but ultimately tolerable, and this is unnecessary and I kinda wish it wasn't here, this is doing something interesting. In the moments before his death, Rickard observes that people are hardwired to prefer stories with happy endings, rather than dwelling on the bitter truth. When done in service of the show's more light-hearted moments, the fanservice actually does contribute to the levity that helps the harsher moments go down better. It's when it starts cropping up in the more serious scenes that it starts feeling out of place. And a lot of the moments are tastefully done, especially when Izetta sees Fine in revealing nightwear and becomes aware of a growing attraction to her. It's not really fanservice in that moment because the characters it's happening to are agents in the scenario in a way that they're not when Izetta is getting her boobs grabbed from behind just because her publicity agent is a pervert. But ultimately, it's just not consistent, and whatever titillation I gain from the experience is temporary and not satisfying enough to be worth it. By contrast, Witch from Mercury barely has any fan service at all. I mean, some shots linger on Cecilia's glorious thighs, and towards the end of the show we get to see Miorine in more revealing nightwear, but it never feels like the show is going out of its way to creep on these characters the same way Izetta the Last Witch does. I mean, look at this scene. There's a bit of horniness going on, but Cecilia is consistently framed as being in control of the situation, and it never feels voyeuristic. Similarly, Miorine is in a nightgown because she's been holed up in her chambers for days after watching all her plans to help the Earthians literally go up in flames. There's nothing sexualized at all about this scene. Her outfit makes sense in context, and the camera frames her the same way it would if she were dressed in a business suit. That's because the creators behind Witch from Mercury understand why the audience is here. We want to see cool mech fights and follow an intricate narrative told from a variety of perspectives about how children shouldn't be responsible for cleaning up after their parents. We want to see a story unfold, and no amount of distracting cleavage or panty shots are going to enhance that experience. There are shows where it does, but it's not this one, and the creators understood that. Oh, and there's one other reason the audience is here for both these shows.
But I'm a girl, you know?
Seems Mercury is rather conservative. Your gender isn't a problem.
So in my journey to catch up on all the anime I've missed over the years, I've been exposed to several shows featuring two girls who are very close friends, where even though the relationship isn't made explicitly romantic by the end, it's still pretty obvious what they were going for. Shows like Licorice Recoil or the absolutely unhinged golf anime Birdie Wing, both of which have your attention lingering just under the surface, but won't actually pull the trigger because they don't officially fall under the girls' love category. And I thought that's what I was getting with these shows as well. Neither of these couples has an on-screen kiss, and their relationship status is kept vague for the majority of the runtime because they aren't in the romance genre. As much as I wish it were otherwise, I'm used to it by this point. That said, look at how fucking gay this is.
But Miss Miorine...
I want you to rely on me. You need to say it!
Then you need to relax. Out here, no one will be able to see us.
We'll buy each other rings and have a ceremony. We'll both wear the prettiest dresses. Archduchess Fine.
Just my name.
Fine.
Nice to meet you, my groom-to-be.
These shows go about establishing their Yuri elements in very different ways. In Witch from Mercury's case, they make things explicit right out the gate by straight up lifting the concept of dueling to establish who the princess marries from Revolutionary Girl Utena, an anime that serves as the blueprint for so many sapphic couples to this day, even outside of anime. The show does introduce other, male love rivals, but those relationships do not go anywhere, and make things extremely awkward in-universe every time they come up. Not that this stopped the fandom from using Gwen and Ellen to establish plausible deniability in order to ignore the blatant sapphic relationship that the show's entire dynamic arc revolves around. There's also that infamous quote from a Bandai exec about things being open to interpretation, but the team that actually made the thing literally added wedding rings to Miorine and Suletta's fingers for the Blu-ray release, so it doesn't seem all that open to me. Ironically, by not mentioning romantic relationships at all, Izetta the Last Witch actually ends up making things even more obvious. The only time Fine even brings up the topic of marriage is with the goal of securing a political alliance with Britannia that's immediately taken off the table once she learns that Aelstad has been invaded while they were talking. And once she's properly reunited with Izetta, there is absolutely no question as to who the most important person in her life is. Before dropping out of a plane to sink an aircraft carrier, Izetta explicitly declares her love for Fine, even if she doesn't elaborate on what kind of love. But that same episode also features this scene, so like, come on. There's a saying I like to bring out when talking about shows that operate the way these two do, which is, if they have to kiss for you to know they're in love, you weren't paying attention. At this point, I've been shipping sapphic couples for nearly half my life, so I'm very accustomed to sifting through breadcrumbs to catch hints of a relationship that the show's creators may not have even intended. I don't need the romance to be consummated on screen in front of me in order to believe in it, and given that neither of these shows are in the romance genre, I'm fine with filling in the blanks myself. At the same time though, I wish these shows were more explicit about it. The reason they aren't has a lot to do with how these shows get budgeted by the suits in charge. A big reason the one-season curse exists for girls love anime is because of homophobia on the parts of both the execs and the audience, where they'll allow the show to be made, but won't throw their full support behind it. There is no way in hell that Bandai Namco is going to forfeit money from the parts of the fanbase that refuse to acknowledge the obvious relationship between its leads, which is why they claim it's open to interpretation, even though it clearly isn't. And for an original anime that doesn't have the weight of a decades-old franchise behind it, there's almost no chance they would have gotten the money for this level of animation if they'd made things any clearer. But even beyond those reasons, that level of physical intimacy being shown on screen isn't what either of these shows are really about. Not that Izetta doesn't feature girls kissing, it just happens like this.
Izetta!
And it's technically not really a kiss since she was doing it to extract the blood she needed to cure her amnesia or whatever. But it just so happened to interrupt a scene where our two leading ladies were about to share a private dance, so it's gay any way you slice it. Honestly, it's way harder to read Fine and Izetta's relationship in a way that doesn't involve them having feelings for each other, since Izetta's motivation for joining the war is primarily to save the country of the woman she loves and make her happy, even at tremendous personal cost not only to her body, but also her soul. Fine allows Izetta to treat her with a familiarity beyond her station that only makes sense if they're so close as to basically already be married. The love they have for each other is what brings them together, and it's what pulls them through everything even while it causes just as many problems as it solves. And the epilogue only makes it more obvious. Which for Mercury has to devote a lot more time to Suletta and Miorine actually getting to know each other, because this show isn't working with the childhood friends backstory like Izetta the Last Witch is. They start out as perfect strangers who are nevertheless drawn to each other by something neither of them can name, but by the end of the first season it's clear that they give each other a purpose they never thought they could have. Suletta finds someone outside of her mother to devote herself to, and Miorine finds someone who gives her a new goal beyond just running away to Earth. In perhaps the show's most famous scene, Miorine tackles Suletta against a window and refuses to stop hugging her because it's this crazy redhead's fault that she actually has something to strive towards now. Suletta squashing an assassin like a bug right in front of her in the following episode obviously puts some distance between them, but Miorine's problem isn't with her, but rather the way she unquestionably follows her mother, even to the point of compromising her own morals with a smile on her face. Suletta is extremely impressionable when hearing something from a person she greatly admires, and on multiple occasions Miorine is confronted with the fact that this now applies to her. That might partially explain the way she keeps her distance for most of the second season, like she's terrified that Suletta's innocence might be tainted further by the cruel world of corporate politics that she now finds herself embroiled in after stepping into her father's shoes. The battle for Suletta's soul plays out between Prospera and Miorine, between the mother who raised her but always prioritized her original daughter, and the girl who never asked for her to crash into her life, but ended up better for it. And ultimately, love wins. Prospera is humbled by both her daughters working together to stop the State's Assembly League from destroying everyone, and Miorine gets rid of the Bennett group by redistributing its assets the same way that Suletta disposes of the Gundams. We don't get to see the wedding, but Suletta and Miorine end the series as a married couple, doing their best to leave the solar system a better place than they found it. And just to make it even more political, the major antagonistic force of both these shows is the way that a patriarchal society naturally shapes the way that the military-industrial complex ruins lives in pursuit of its own expansionism. In less academic terms, Witch from Mercury devotes a huge section of its runtime to examining the way that the students at Astakasia are being indoctrinated and groomed into a war economy that is never ending by design. The Banneret Group is explicitly a competitive meritocracy where a company's performance is tied to its survival, and this is personalized through the arcs of characters like Well Jetter, who is evicted from his school dormitory after repeatedly losing duels and letting down his father. He then literally kills his father in one of the show's least subtle metaphors, before seeing the effects of his company's mobile suits up close and personal in a way that he never had to while his perception of the world was sheltered by his life at Astakasia. By the time he returns to the school, he's realized that war isn't a fucking game, and finally matures as a character. Miorine especially is a victim of this system, since the structure of the Bennett Group is literally patriarchal, with her actual father at the top. Her escape attempts are short-lived because she can only think of it in terms of personally extricating herself from the system without seeing how it affects everything, especially the Earth she's trying to flee to. She then tries to change the system from the inside by founding Gundam and focusing on the medical prosthetic technology that the Gundam format was originally developed for, before being forced to step into her father's shoes after the attempt on his life. And once she's at the top, she realizes that nothing she does within the rules of the system will stop the endless wheel of blood, because that is what the system is designed to do. So at the end of the series, she takes the radical option and tears it all down so something new can arise from the ashes. Izetta the Last Witch pulls from the real world politics surrounding World War II and simplifies it a bit for the sake of runtime. A lesson we can learn from the real-world factors leading to World War II is a concept known as the Imperial Boomerang, also called Foucault's Boomerang, in which the military tactics and political strategies used by an empire and its colonies will always come home to roost against its neighbors and its own citizens. In the real world, this led to the rise of fascism in Italy, Spain, and Germany, but the narrative of the show doesn't dive that deep, and uses the altered setting to avoid directly confronting the horrors of the Nazis, like I mentioned before. But this is necessary groundwork for understanding that all empires are ultimately the expression of nationalist expansionism, which derives directly from a society that places value on a stratified hierarchy, almost always with a man at the top. By positioning this kind of country as the antagonist in the form of the Germanian Empire, having our heroes be a female archduchess and a witch is not an incidental detail. Nor is the fact that when they try to wage war on their enemy's terms, all Fine and Izetta end up doing is feed into an endless cycle of escalation that's only broken when Izetta rids the world of magic entirely. In both cases, having the heroes be two women who love each other and only want to be left in peace away from the fighting is a revolutionary political sentiment in a way that makes the Yuri important to the themes of each work well beyond whether they kiss on screen or not. Miarne starts the series being unable to decide who she marries because of the way her father has set up the system, but ends up marrying Suletta at the end anyway because it's her choice now, and that difference matters. All Fine and Izetta wanted was for the other to be happy, and after making a lot of mistakes trying to play by the rules of a patriarchal world, end up carving out their own version of peace and happiness. Thus, both shows end by saying that there's always a better way. Would I have preferred to see them express their feelings in a way that left even less room for doubt? Of course. But if you're even slightly willing to meet these stories on their own terms, it quickly becomes obvious that they're both about love. I was not expecting the themes of these shows to overlap so much when I first sat down to watch Izetta the Lost Witch, but once I started pulling on that thread, it refused to leave me alone until I wrote down my thoughts. I wasn't able to confirm whether the inspiration was direct or not, but these stories feel like they're in conversation with each other either way. That sort of thing happens when writers play in the same creative space and explore similar ideas, and both shows really ended up resonating with me. Ultimately, I think this is less a case of direct inspiration and more about shared influences coming full circle. After all, the original Mobile Suit Gundam also stars a bright-eyed young redhead who's thrust into the role of a savior, only for his optimism to be crushed by the realities of war. I don't really have a larger point to make, and the main creative impetus behind this video was just to explore the way that different stories can tackle similar themes and each come away with their own version of it. There are elements that I feel one might tackle better than the other, but ultimately both shows were made by a team of passionate people, and their effort really shines through in the end product. I'm looking forward to what all of them make next.